Well, happy Friday, everybody. Time for another Friday Mastermind where we're going to have some quick wins for you this Friday. Hey, listen, we are probably going to hit capacity here. So just in case some of you get kicked off, there is, if you go to my YouTube channel and you go to the live portion, you'll be able to get back on where you can see it there. We're looking at this already 725, 738, growing 750. We're getting there very quickly. Listen, in the chat on the side, let us know as we're letting people come in. Where are you coming in from today? I'm going to pull this up where we can see some of this. The ATL, VSGS, New Jersey. Let's see. Reese Nichols, Jacksonville, California, Kansas City, Chicago, Auburn, Alabama. Love it. So we got people from all over the country coming in. Hey, we're already at 900 folks coming in right now. So congratulations to those of you that got in because we are probably about to hit capacity on this. We've got an amazing amount of information for you today that is absolutely going to empower you to be able to serve your clients and your prospects and set yourself apart as the professional. And that's going to be something that I cannot wait for us to get to. Listen, as we're going into this, here we are, 950 already, coming up here on 1,000 already. And I know we've got a bunch over on live as well. Thanks for everybody for joining in. I want to get right into this as quick as we can. So listen, thanks again to Sam for always being here, giving us a background on exactly kind of the questions. As you have those, we will have a time for Q&A at the end. Be dropping those questions in, and then at the end, just so you know, you hear that knowledge is power. It's true to a certain extent, but knowledge is just potential power. We're gonna give you some ideas on exactly what you can do to make sure that you can take this information and really put it into practice. So all of that is getting ready to come to you. Hey, let's go ahead. Sam, thanks again for always being here. I want to introduce everybody we're going to have here for you today. And Sam, if we can bring them forward, that would be great. I want to first introduce Gretchen Rosenberg. Gretchen is the president and CEO for Kentwood Real Estate out in Colorado. An amazing leader, great friend. She's just someone that inspires me to be better at what I do, and really just an industry icon, I guess you could say. And one of the things I want to mention also is she's also our HSOA, Home Services of America, liaison to industry affairs, which means that she is a voice for us in the industry. And so I know, Gretchen, this is I'm glad to have you here. We're going to get to you in just a second. I also want to mention, obviously, we got Chris Kelly with us, CEO and president, best leader I've ever been around. Just an amazing leader, and he is going to be with us today sharing some insights as well on what we can expect in 2026. And then Gretchen and I are going to give some color on exactly how you can utilize these as an agent. And then, of course, my good friend, David Childers. Listen, president and industry. Look, David Childers is, I've said this before, the voice of real estate in North America. He is literally empowers us with the types of things we can do to not just have the data, but have it in a presentation way that we can utilize it. David, thank you for being with us, my friend. Let's go ahead and get started. So Gretchen, Chris, I'd love for y'all to give a little bit of a background on kind of how this came about, what they can expect, and then we'll kind of go into a little bit of this. I'm going to even share my screen where we get into a little bit of this as well as we're doing that. But Gretchen, if you don't mind, if you'll kick us off.
Hey, thanks, Jimmy. It's great to be here. I feel like I really hit the jackpot with this group of folks and how smart everybody is and what we've pulled together. We're all super proud of it. And it was just sort of a brainchild of mine. And then I went to Chris and he said, run with it. And all the other CEOs loved the idea too. And then Chris suggested, because I said, I can write it, but I don't know how to do the graphs. And he said, let's get David on board and keeping current matters. And so it just turned into a massive collaboration. I have to give a shout out to the Kentwood marketing team who helped me pull it together. And the goal with this is to empower our home services agents out there in the field with as much information and really tangible data that you can have and we want to do this twice a year for you now so that you can get out there and show how smart you are, win more business.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, before I come to you, can I add one thing? I know we've got a lot of agents that are on this that are not necessarily with Home Services. Let me just say this. At Home Services of America, we want to be, whether you're under our banner yet or not. We want to empower you to serve your clients at the highest level. So listen, this is not just for Home Service of America agents. We want to empower you because listen, I believe, and we have, Chris has really, really pioneered this for us, that we are all stronger together. So we're going to give you information that you can utilize in your market. Obviously, you're going to see our Home Services branding here, but I just want you to know this is stuff that you're going to be able to utilize and go from there. And I know, Chris, under your leadership, we just want to be out there and just helping everybody serve their clients at the highest level. So Chris, your thoughts on kind of how this came about and what they can expect in the next little bit.
Yeah. So, Gretchen, we had done PowerPoints and some like screen share videos in the past where I talked about what was coming up in the market and, based on things that, David was sharing with us and from other forecasts, across the industry. And, I think Gretchen's idea was like, we probably need to level this up a little bit that we can actually put something in the hands of our agents that they can be proud to hand to a consumer client to get out to their sphere. And so you're going to get in the chat, Sam's going to share you. We've got a digital version of this. There's a PDF version of it. You can print it off and use it. I saw a question come in that said, I'm with BHHS. Absolutely. Wendy and the team at BHHS are going to have this. They're going to distribute it out through that network as well. And if you're not with us, we don't care. Sam's going to give you the link. You can go straight to our blog site and download it and use it. It's all yours. The smarter and better all of us are educating our clients out there in the sphere, the better we're all going to be. Right. And I think all of I would much rather be working with an educated, amazing professional on the other side of a transaction than someone who's not. So the more people we can empower, the better. And then, I'll bring David in here a little bit. David, this is a national outlook. And I've always liked why at KCM you talk about why agents, even though we talk about real estate being local and, all these topics that we're going to talk about, from mortgage rates to inventory to sales to prices to the health of the homeowner. A lot of those look different from market to market, but it's really important as an agent, you pay attention to the national landscape as well. And you always articulate this very well. So I'll bring you in and let you kind of share on that.
Yeah, I think first of all, let me say this. We are thrilled to be partnered with you on this and bring some of this. And to be honest, Gretchen and her team sent over the original doc. And I thought, like, I don't know if you need us. Like, it was so well written. It was an amazing piece that we were just able to bring some visuals to. And here, I want to say a couple of things as we get started. It's a beautiful, you can see it up on the screen right now, very well designed, very, very good piece. And I always think about this. You can tell somebody what's going on, out in the world, but why just tell them when you can show them? We can put something in somebody's hands and show them what's happening in real estate. And I think you bring up a good point. Chris, it's important for people to understand the national picture, because every time they turn on the news and hear something, they're going to hear some form of that, oftentimes not done to our service, right? It's going to be twisted, or it's going to be, sort of lead people to believe something that may not be true. And then we can bring in our local expertise and say, hey, like, if you even take the example on the screen, here's what prices, nationally are being talked about, but here's what's happening right where we're at for this reason. And I think that's in 2026 going to be our job.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And again, that's oftentimes even on the local news or papers, it is those national headlines that the consumer originally sees. Yeah. And then after that, it's our job to come in and put perspective on the national versus what's happening locally.
1,000%.
I'll tell you what, let's do. Let's get right into this because we want to save some time for Q&A. I'm going to go through this. We've kind of given a little bit of an overview, but let's start with rates. And David, obviously, we've seen some pretty amazing things since the first of the year already. If you don't mind, let you just kind of share with us kind of what this chart means and kind of what agents should be watching for and expecting as we go into this next year.
Yeah, it's certainly the focal point. I think right now, if folks on the call haven't seen everything, the movement in rates, I have questions about that. But we've all seen a little bit of relief in the last few days, last week on the 30-year fixed mortgage rate. But let me back up and tell you a couple of things that I would say are the story of rates. Now, this is a look right here going all the way back to 2018, and you can see up to this year, and then even the forecast. A couple of things. If you were to look at 2025, the story of the mortgage rate is we started in January of last year about 7% and ended the year about 6%. That's one full percentage point of buying power that is now translated to the consumer. And just to give you easy math on it, $500,000 borrowed this time versus last year is a savings of about $400 on the payment. So if you live in a smaller market, half of that, $200. If you live in a larger market, 800, call it, but that's a tremendous savings. Also, that's about, in buying power, about $100,000 on on average for that middle tier. Maybe as you go up, it's more buying power. And I think that's the story right now in real estate. And as I look at forecasts, and the forecasts are in here, you can just even see visually kind of this sort of year of bouncing around the low sixes. Maybe we dip our toe in the fives. I think our job right now is to have buyers ready for when we do dip our toe in. Do I think we're heading into this, 5 scenario where we're going to go down to 5.5? I don't. All this is based on incoming information. The administration came out and said, hey, we're going to buy $200 billion in mortgage-backed securities. That had an impact on the market where we're getting the benefit of that right now. But I think we will be in a better mortgage sort of environment in 2026 than we were in 2025, and that's good news.
Yeah, Chris, you want to add to that?
I was just going to say, yeah, I'm hopeful that when we're doing this presentation, whether it's our mid-year one that we'll do like in June or this time next year, that when we show this same chart with a year added onto it, that line is fairly steady, right? Because when I look back to 2018 and I see this happening, that is what causes consumers to panic and take a step back, because they're not sure what to do. Now, certainly we saw a lot of activity in 2020 to the front half of 22 when the rates dipped that low. But those that were paying attention, and I think a lot of you out there were, when we were down there, you all knew we were going to pay the price for that. Like at some point, we were going to pay the price for that because of what happened. We were pulling forward demand because of those rates. And then we saw rates go up as the Fed tightened their restrictions on rates, and we saw it really slow down. What we're starting to see now is pent-up demand, people that have been waiting for the last couple of years, and they're wanting to now say, look, life gets in the way. I still need to move for whatever reason. Stability, consistency, and rates will absolutely help the mindset of the consumer out there. That's why we've been talking about with a lot of you out in the field, which is, let's not make such a big deal when every single day, if the rates do this or they do that, these little incremental jumps, because you're conditioning the consumer that they shouldn't be thinking about real estate until the rates are XYZ, whatever it may be. And so it's really about every individual out there, what their particular circumstances are. If they wait and rates drop a little bit, but in their particular market, home prices go up 5%, have they done anything financially for themselves? Probably not. So I'm really hopeful to what David said. We just start seeing a really much more stabilization that we need right here in rates, and that'll make consumers feel more comfortable to jump in.
Yeah. Hey, Gretchen, before I come to you, if any ideas you've got on how agents can utilize this, I'm going to share something. A couple of weeks ago, we had Jimmy Mackin on and to kick off the year. And one of the things that he did is he was talking about how to utilize the data here, or this information, or the volatility we've seen, as an opportunity to generate some leads with this. So what I want to do is give you one way to do this that Jimmy had shared. And basically what he said is that if you used your Instagram story and you did a poll and you basically stated, now based on this, last week we saw interest rates drop in below 6% for the first time in a good while. If they were to drop again below 6%, would it affect your decision to potentially buy or sell in 2026? And then it had a vote yes or no. Anyone that votes yes, those are people that you should absolutely have some conversations with. So these are some ways to utilize this data, not just to have the information, but to use it to generate some leads. All right, Gretchen, anything that you would suggest as far as conversations about rates for agents, or anything that you would add to this?
I want to highlight what Chris said. I think it's really important for the agents out there to hear that. And that is, don't let them focus on every little basis point change, because as he said, we're conditioning them to overly focus on rates. Let's get them out there, finding the house that they want, that fits their lifestyle. And as we kind of see this smooth out and less volatility, hopefully that mindset will shift.
I agree. Absolutely. Hey, let's keep moving. Let's go actually into some of the things. David, do you mind speaking to this about kind of what we're seeing with rates and what it looks like on a national basis and some changes we're seeing here?
Yeah, I think this does a good job of just sort of showing the situation of rate lock. So a lot of people talk about that and talk about the number of homeowners, you saw it on the last slide, that have a great rate. And we'll talk about this more in just a minute. But I think the quick story on this is we're starting to see, if you look at the very bottom here, the gray bar, which is above 6%, we're starting to see a shift there, right? That's everybody that's bought a home in the last, call it 24 months. And so the reality is there are a lot of people that have a 3%, a 4%, whatever, mortgage rate on their home. But, the old thing that, you always say, life events are what is going to drive our business going forward. The joke is, two people getting divorced aren't going to stay in the house for a 3% mortgage rate. I'll tell you that. You know what I mean? And we know the reality of what brings transactions in our world. And, we've come out of, several years ago where it was just opportunistic. We can buy now what we, can afford, and maybe we'll take two in sort of the busyness of the market. And we're in a time right now where, affordability is improving, and we're seeing more people, sort of this kind of, landscape shift on those that have a preferred mortgage rate. But this is going to hang around for a while. I wouldn't be scared of it. The reality of folks that have a great mortgage rate, and good for them. Many of us on the call hopefully have that as well.
Yeah, this is great. Talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about kind of how the 10-year Treasury and why we watch it so closely, if you don't mind, and kind of what we're seeing with this, if you don't mind as well.
Yeah, I think this is something very important. So for the last 30 years, it's actually longer than that. But then this picture right here, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate has moved in unison with the 10-year Treasury yield. So if you want to know where mortgage rates are going, watch the 10-year. It's sort of a barometer, and the average spread is 176 basis points. You see it sort of in the middle of the screen there. So if you literally took the 10-year Treasury, added 176 or 1.76%, on average, you would end up at the 30-year fixed mortgage rate. Now, what do we know? We know the spread has been inflated over the last couple of years. And I always think about that in a real term is sort of a measure of fear, right? Of what's going on in the world and in the mortgage environment. And we've seen the spread come down. So that's why, if you want to pay attention to this, and I'm not suggesting everybody becomes, an expert in the secondary mortgage market by any stretch of the imagination, but have an understanding of what's happening in the 10-year, have an understanding of what's going on there. And I want to add one thing, and I agree 1,000% with what Chris said, and Gretchen, you echoed that. I would not condition my customer to look at mortgage rates consistently. But I will say this, I do believe we'll be in a better rate environment this year. Again, I told you bouncing around the low sixes, high fives. If we do take a dip in that, guess what happens? Consumers rush in. That's what happens. People go, now it's time to buy. And so I do think there's opportunity in the market for the opportunistic buyer before those little chunks of time.
Hey, David, but Chris, to speak to that, I mean, obviously we saw that last week on Friday when we had the snap drop down below 6%. Some of the things we saw with Prosperity and the amount of locks that we had. You want to speak to this a little bit, and maybe even some of those things that David's talking about, that what we would expect if we do see some of those things is something that taking action now and preparing our people now it just makes so much more sense.
Yeah, if you'll go back 2 slides for me real quick, there was a pie chart that I wanted folks to look at real quick too. That pie chart is very similar to what the next slide, which was the lots of bars and colors. But if you look at the 2 slices at the top there, that's what David was talking about. Mortgages below 3%, about 20% of outstanding mortgages. Mortgages above, almost 20%, right? So we're finally at a point where those two things are even. And so the rate lock effect doesn't just end, it eases over time. So every month we go forward, we're going to see that light gray bar chart actually start, that pie piece will actually grow, and the black one will actually start to shrink. And so over time, it'll get really small again, as those life circumstances start to come up. And to your point, Jimmy, on talking to Prosperity, I was just talking to their mortgage leaders this morning. And, what we saw happen in December and the first few weeks of January, we're better than we were the year before, and we're better than we were 2 years before at this exact same time. And so, again, folks will sit on the sideline for only so long. And the key for us is just to put information in front of them. And David talks about this all the time. When a client feels educated, they feel confident to move forward and work with an agent. And I think that's where we can really stand out from the competition. Instead of selling hype, we can actually give them information and give them confidence to make a decision that they're thinking about right now.
Yeah, so spot on. All right, let's keep moving here. David, let's shift a little bit to inventory right now. Can you speak a little bit to what we're seeing on, this is one of the things that is really affecting our markets and underlying that a lot of people miss. Do you mind speaking to this a little bit?
Yeah, so this is a look at not new construction, number of homes built going all the way back to the 70s. So each one of the sort of bars represents a year and the number of homes that were built in this country. And a couple of things that I would draw out. The reason for the sort of rapid price increase were twofold. One, mortgage rates fall to lowest levels probably ever. I probably think, it's the lowest level we'll see in our lifetime. Let's hope we don't see rates like that again, because it means something else is off in a massive way. But the truth is, we built more homes back in the 70s and 80s than we did over the last decade. You see the gray bars there to the right of the last decade. So what happens? Mortgage rates fall, everybody rushes in, and we don't have the number of homes having been built to keep up with population growth. Everybody rushes in and the price dramatically rises. That's the story of 2020 and 21 and 22. Very, very different from 2008. But from the consumer standpoint, they're like, well, let me get this straight. Prices went up dramatically. Feels like the economy might be, slowing down a little bit. That doesn't sound good. And oh, by the way, when all the homes get foreclosed on, I want two of them. That's sort of the mindset of a lot of folks. And if I even break this down further, the yellow bars that are highlighted, there were 4 consecutive years of record-setting number of homes built in this country. Never happened before, hasn't happened since, leading up to 2008. Market, happens in 2008, and a lot of builders got out of the business, and we just didn't build the homes that we needed. And those that track it would say we're probably in this country 2 to 3 million units undersupplied. And that's what's going to keep upward pressure on prices. Now, there are more people that want to buy than can buy, but the thing that stands in their way is affordability. And we can talk about affordability, but it's not because of the desire to buy a home. It's because I'm not sure I can afford it or I can't afford it. And I do believe as we go throughout the year, affordability will improve, which is another thing I'm optimistic about in 2026.
Chris, you want to add to this a little bit?
Yeah, I love this chart, and I've used it frequently for the last several years to try to help people have an understanding of where we were, even during COVID, right? Because if you look at that August 2025 bar, look, there was points in the 80s and 70s where we were building more homes in the 70s and 80s than we were in August of this year, despite the population growth of 50 to 75 million people since that time. And so what happened was when we went through the Great Recession, half of all builders across this country were out of business overnight. Yeah. And so we just had a lack of under construction. So the phenomenon that we experienced in COVID was really something that had been building for 10 to 12 years. And there were people in the industry talking about it, even in 2016, that we have an inventory issue that is coming, that is going to be a problem. And then so when you have a generation like Gen X and then the massive generation of millennials hitting, home buying age in that 2020 period, and you had a lack of inventory, that's why we saw that spike in prices. And so the way we get back to true affordability is I like all the little things that are being proposed, like buying more mortgage bonds by the GSEs and stuff. And, maybe we don't allow large scale national investors to buy up so many single family homes, even though they represent a fairly small percentage of the ones that actually own it. There is no silver bullet. The best thing that we can do is for local communities and counties to make it easier and faster for new construction to get built, to continue to supply new construction into the market. If you look at the average age of the home over in the US over the last 20 years, it's skyrocketed. Where like the average age of the home is, 40 years at this point, because we haven't been backfilling with enough new construction. So my hope is that as we go forward over the next 5 to 10 years, we don't have as many impediments in local communities to get some more new construction up there. That's how we're going to level set affordability for the next generation of buyers.
Yeah.
Hey, let me just Let me just, before you come in, David, I want to mention this real quick, because these talking points that you're hearing Chris, that you're hearing David, that you're hearing Gretchen mention, these are all things that I would encourage you can go back and replay this, but put these in your own words. Let this become your language, because this is the language that will create someone's understanding that you have a grasp and are the professional agent they're looking for. So, David, I'm sorry to stop the flow there, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands this is absolutely an opportunity for you to get some language that you can utilize for yourself and that you can begin to own as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing I was going to say about this graphic right here, if they're in, and I've had the opportunity, tremendous blessing to share the KCM message so many times over the last several years. If I were to say, what is the one graphic that I would say explains the market, it's this one right here. I would get really good at understanding it, but don't. And I agree with everything that Chris said. I think it's going to be about legislation and creating more. And oh, by the way, every politician is focused on this right now. Why? Because Americans are frustrated, and they're like, the way politics works in this country is politicians go, I have the answer for what ails you, vote for me. That's how politicians, that's how it works. Well, we hope they can make changes, and we want to see them make changes. But here's my point in that. We may all on this call right now go, oh, I understand that. I get it. The buyers and sellers and clients that you serve every day don't understand this by and large. And so us getting better at showing people this is why prices went up. This is why the market's acting like it has, puts them in a position to go, okay, I get that. That makes a lot of sense. I know somebody that was hurt back in 2008. Maybe I was hurt back in 2008. We got a lot of people on this call. There were a lot of us that sold houses back then that we probably didn't want to sell, and I think understanding that and being able to tell the story of the market is critically important right now.
I agree. Hey, let's keep moving here. Let's get to the sales side, the anticipated numbers and some of the forecasts we have. David, do you want to speak to this specifically? And then Chris, will come to you. And then Gretchen, I'll come to you right after that.
Yeah. So this is a look at existing home sales and new construction sales over the last couple of years and what's projected for 26. So 24, 4.7 projected, 4.7 here this year. Let's call those 2 years sort of even right there. There's a sort of this forecast for about 10% growth in the number of transactions. Why is that? I'll give you two reasons that I believe we'll see growth in transactions and they're coming out in forecast. One is a better mortgage rate environment. That clearly will bring some people back into the market that can now afford it. It's not going to bring this rush of consumers in, but it'll bring some in. Two, and I can't remember who said it, but it will be people that put off a decision over the last couple of years that see a little bit more stability, like you said, Chris, and they go, you know what, now is the time. We put it off, we didn't do it, and now we see that going forward. So I think these consensus projections are about 10% growth in transactions. I believe we'll see it for those reasons.
Yeah. So Chris, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add to it is to echo what David said. The key here is that, we've seen ranges. If you look at just existing home sales, you've got some predictions in forecasts coming in at 2%. NAR, National Association of Realtors, the highest at 14%. I saw someone asked about the MBA, that's the Mortgage Bankers Association. They're 8-9%. And so there's this big fluctuation in there. So I think everyone's kind of a consensus that it's going to be better in 26 for all the reasons David just articulated. But the key is unless we have probably some other type of geopolitical event or some type of economic event that plummets, changes the underlying conditions that we are forecasting for right now, it'll be a better year, but it's not going to be something that is, gangbusters. And that's okay. I mean, we got into this mess. The faster we rise out of it means that we're gonna work ourselves back into a future problem as well too. So we'd like to see that slow and steady growth as we kind of come out of the trough that we've been over the last couple of years, back to that normalized, healthy real estate market of what we would anticipate for total home sales every year. And that's how we kind of have a nice balanced market. Buyers feel like they have opportunities to buy. Sellers feel like they can recognize, I'll say, good value for their home. It may not be like winning the lottery like some of us did if we sold our homes, in 21 or 22 and things like that. But for 70% of sellers, they're also buyers on the flip side of it, right? So whatever you're getting on that side, you're just putting it into the next one. A good balanced market where buyers and sellers both feel like they're being heard is really where we want to get to. And I think this kind of slow and steady rise from 26 versus 25 would be welcome news if this is what comes to fruition.
Hey, Chris, what's so exciting about this too is this is the first time in a few years. I mean, every single thing we're talking about is trending to a positive side. I mean, we're talking about anticipating more transactions. We're anticipating, steady to slightly reduced interest rates, mortgage rates. All of these things are positives from an agent's perspective. Gretchen, you want to speak to that? I mean, if you're an agent, you got to be getting excited about what we're looking at going forward. Anything you want to add to this as well?
Well, a couple of suggestions on how agents can use this book, the flip book, or if you wanted to print it, you would be able to just, we're going to send out the link to all of the company leaders on the ability to print this out. But I would say, go do open houses. Like we're hitting open house season, at least around here, as soon as the Super Bowl is over. And so get people to sign in at your open houses. And one carrot you can dangle is, hey, I'll send you our National Housing Outlook. I'll email you a link. You can look at it and you can let me know if you have any questions. So that's one way you can use it. Obviously, with listing consultations and listing presentations, this is a terrific tool. But also, we're supposed to be out there now getting our buyer agency agreements right out of the gate. So use this tool with your buyers and help them understand what they're facing and what the dynamics of the market are and how you can be the expert to help them navigate that and show them your value and get your buyer agency agreement signed.
Yeah, this is absolutely. Yeah. Again, utilizing this in different ways. David, you want to speak to kind of where we are as far as active listings and what we're seeing trend wise there?
Yeah. This is such an interesting graphic. If I'm around the country and I'm telling the story of real estate, I start right here. And the only thing that I add in here that's not on here, and you don't have to add it, is there's a red bar that I'll draw down right the beginning of 2020. So if you just visually think about that, what happened is we're kind of cooking along in real estate 2017, 2018, 2019. I call those the last 3 normal years in real estate. COVID comes in, then I make a joke. Does anybody remember that? But we don't have to do that on here. And then inventory gets depleted, right? Everybody, kind of rushes into the market, and we know the story of that. And the story of the last 5 years of real estate has been this build back of inventory. We finished 2025 sort of in the neighborhood, and you can just see it visually right here of where we were in 17, 18, and 19. And if we're honest, those were very unhealthy markets that we were in. Hopefully, everybody on the call made some money, and that was certainly beneficial to us, but they were unhealthy real estate markets, right? People were selling things extremely quickly. Prices were rising at an unsustainable rate. All these things that we know were happening. And now we're into a market that's starting to operate in a more healthy way. That is the word I would be using as I talk to people is, we're in a more of a healthy real estate market. And I think giving people this kind of information does another thing. You were talking about giving it to somebody at an open house. It builds credibility with them before you ever sit down and talk to them or engage or sign anything. And that's ultimately a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, you want to add anything to this as well?
No, I think the chart tells the story on this one, which is great. Yep.
Yeah. So we're going to move now into some of the existing home sales information. And David, I'll let you kick us off here. And then Chris, if you want to add color to this as well.
Yeah. This one, we were selling a lot more homes a couple of years ago than we have in the last 2 years. Wow. Any questions?
Yeah.
I think, looking at this right now, what you want to sort of help people understand is what caused those shifts, right? Everybody jumping into low mortgage rates. People kind of go, okay, I understand that. Market is shifted with rising costs. Now, I always mention this, and we've talked about it a lot, Jimmy, on different calls. Affordability is the biggest issue that Americans face right now. and it's caused, transaction flow in our business to sort of come down. If you look at 24 and 25, when adjusted for population growth, will be two of the slowest years in real estate, probably in recorded history. Now, there have been plenty of times where we sold 4 million homes, but not at the population we have in this country right now. I've mentioned this many, many times. What happened 2.5 months ago at the midterm elections in November is I ended up watching the news that night, and I wouldn't consider myself a super political person, but what I noticed was every politician mentioned housing affordability in their acceptance speech. Even those that didn't win, were campaigning on it on some level because it's the biggest issue that Americans face. And so when we look at existing home sales, it's a reflection of that. And I think what we want to help people understand are the dynamics behind this, what's causing it, and then help them navigate it, because that's ultimately our job. And I think them understanding what's going on with, the number of homes that are sold. And truthfully, probably most of the people that we work with aren't as concerned about the number of homes that we sell in this country every year. We all are, right? We want to see more homes sold, but it's helping them really understand the dynamics in the market.
Yeah, Chris, anything you want to add to this?
The only thing I'll add here is this is a good chart for the doomsdayers out there that say, we're heading towards some other type of housing crash. It's really hard to do that when you're at a minimum of a 10-year low. And if you went back further, you'd see a little bit after the Great Recession, but even before that. So, we've got room to improve here, and I think we are trending in the right direction. We'll get back up to that kind of closer over the next couple of years to that. On average in the US, it's surprisingly over the last 25 years, regardless of population, about 5 to 5.2 million existing home sales is on average what we would see. So when you see that spike up to almost 7 million during the COVID craze, you knew something was going to happen on the backside of that. And then likewise now, when you see us hovering, in that 4 million to 4.5, 4.2, a recovery is coming. We will get back to that normal pace. So to me, I look at this, we know that there's going to be an upward swing back to some normalization. Really hard to have a housing crash when you're at a 10-year low in actual units being sold.
Such a great point. All right, let's keep moving. New home sales, very similar here to these numbers. We're going to keep moving if that's okay with this, but this kind of just gives you an explanation of what's happening with new homes. Let's get into some of the pricing forecasts, if you don't mind, David. Let's shift to this, kind of what the expectations are, and if you can kind of give us just get this kicked off for us.
Yeah. So this is a look at everybody that's forecasting home price appreciation, in 2026, most recent update. And I think the question that I always get, and I want to sort of help people, head this off, because you're going to get it too, is how right are they? Are they right? And the quick answer to that is they're not right. Nobody has a crystal ball. You can't hit the nail on the head every time. But what I'm trying to look at in this is, what's everybody saying? In the sort of center of this is likely in the US in 2026, we see 1% to 2% home price appreciation, a very flat, I'll call it flat market relative to price. Now, if you go back historically and take out the COVID years, average price appreciation has been 3.8%. So we're below average, but here's the point I wouldn't want you to miss. I don't see a tremendous amount of reputable sources saying prices are going to go down nationally. Now, there are people on this call that are in markets that will see flat or prices go down. I'm not trying to ignore that, but it will not be the entirety of the country. Back in 2008, the US real estate market lost about 20% in value. Nothing anywhere near that as we come out of what we've known over the last couple of years. So that's a big point that I'd want you to take away from this. The other big point that if we don't use this to our advantage, I think we're missing, is affordability as a component of the mortgage rate paid, the price of the home, and the wage that people are making. Price is not rising as fast as they have been, or even below historical numbers, bodes well for affordability. So we should be the mouthpiece for what's happening on affordability and what's going on. And I think this is a positive message here relative to what that's going to look like in 2026 and beyond.
Chris?
Yeah, I think, you know, what I've always liked the way that David does this, and why we included this chart was, and, you know, we have, you know, 10 of these different ones up there, is because it's the one that can vary the most. And you do kind of want to look at the averages because there's not a lot of consensus. You can see from MBA being negative, NAR, which again, I always feel like it tends to err on the side of optimism. Because they're serving their members and they want the members to feel good. It's not to say that Lawrence and his team aren't looking at actual data. It just historically what we've seen, it tends to trend optimistically. And again, we could definitely see some markets that are up 4% based on, you know, where they're at. And I know we've got some other information in the report here. The key on this one is that this is the change in 1 year. It's what's happened over the last 5 or 6 years is really what matters. So even if you happen to be in a market like Austin, so oftentimes the market that saw the most craze during COVID as far as price appreciation are the ones that are feeling some of the effects going downward, right? So, oh my gosh, prices dropped 10% in a particular market year over year. Look at it from 5 to 6 years ago, right? So in Texas, for example, right, up 40, you know, almost 41% over the last 5 years. So even though it's come down a little bit, you know, if you've been in your house for more than 5 years, you're still up a tremendous amount. And we look across the national average, you know, almost, you know, 48.5, almost 49% for the nation, and higher in some other places, a little lower in other places, but every single state up over the last 5 years. So this year over year price appreciation, it's something that we look at, but it's really over time. Most of the people we serve are not buying a house for a 1 year gain. If they were, they're going to pay a lot of taxes on it anyway. But that's not what it is. Housing it is supposed to be a long-term investment. It's stability. It's locking in my monthly payment versus rent that could accelerate with inflation. I'm taking inflation out of the equation by buying a home. And over time, as I own it, what we see is the price goes up, and the more moderate it goes up over time, the better it is for everybody.
Yeah.
Hey, I would say this. I would add to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would add to that is a lot of times people, like you're talking about, Chris, they look at the shorter term. Owning real estate is not about timing the market. It's about time in market. So when you understand that this is a long-term wealth building situation, you're absolutely going to understand this. This chart is just as important, more important when you're talking to people than the 1 year expectations on where we are from that perspective. Again, though, if you look at this predominantly, measured growth is so healthy for us to be expectation-wise of that we're not going to see these, you know, huge moves up or down. We're seeing some measured growth, which is super helpful over time.
Can I
David,
add one other thing, Jimmy, about that?
Yeah.
Can you go back 2 slides to that
Yes.
longer graphic? This is a perfect place to bring in your market opinion. Okay, to say, hey, nationally, here's what we see. We see 1 to 2% price growth. Nobody calling for prices to fall. And I agree with what you said. And MBA, I'm not really sure why they're sort of calling for that. And I agree with the NAR perspective. But I want to be able to say, hey, nationally, probably 1 to 2%. Nobody calling for a crash in real estate. Right here where we're at, here's what we think. Right, prices will be flatter. I was on Long Island last week, and they're probably looking at 7 to 8% price growth because of limited inventory numbers up in the Northeast. So depending on where you're at, applying local expertise, this is a perfect way and a great way to do it.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I think this one too is where you bring in that previous chart. That's one that you talk to your buyers about. So the whole idea of, you know, whatever your thoughts are locally for price appreciation in your market, the buyer that says, I'm waiting until rates do X and then I'll get into the market. This is where you talk about price appreciation and what you think is going to happen in your market over the next year. Because if they're waiting for rates to drop a little bit, but prices are going to go up 2 to 3% in your particular market, again, it's offset. It hasn't made a financial impact for them. And so this is another one where for buyers, I think could be really important.
Another great point.
Jimmy,
go ahead, Jack. Yeah, Gretchen, please.
The next slide is a good one to work with sellers on when you're trying to get them to be realistic on pricing, because we're still having trouble with sellers really hearing from their agents the truth about where they should come out in pricing. And so if you can tell them, look, if you've been in your house more than 5 years in Wyoming, you're up 44.5%. So you've got some good equity. Now let's talk about where our market is today, as David said, this local market, what we expect, and why you should not be pricing based on what happened in 2021.
Yeah, and obviously we don't have a crystal ball, as David said, but to think that we would have back-to-back 5-year growth types of like these numbers that we saw, which are, you know, above average, would probably be being optimistic at best. So from that standpoint, I think it's a great point, Gretchen, of utilizing this to have those conversations. So this is something, David, I'd love for you to speak to this as we continue talking a little more about this mortgage, homes, and equity. We're going to kind of shift into kind of the status of the homeowner as we're shifting here, as well as where they are in the health of that.
Yeah, I think this graphic always, when I see it, you know, I kind of take a step back and go, wow. I think there are a couple of things we can say confidently based on what we've looked at today. One, the strength of the homeowner in the United States below the surface is probably stronger than it's ever been. I think we could say that very confidently. You know, if you even go back and you look at the number of people that I would call have a preferred mortgage rate, sometimes it gives us a little bit of heartburn, and we didn't wish that, but great for those people, right? That's another reason that we don't see a foreclosure crisis. You know, the majority of people in this country that have a mortgage could not go out and rent a home or rent an apartment for what their mortgage payment is, right? They're going to do everything in their power to be able to, you know, keep that home. And that's why we see delinquency rates very, very low right now. This doesn't put it into, you know, context over time. But back in 2008, 9 million people went through some sort of, you know, deed in lieu, distress transaction, foreclosure, whatever, short sale, whatever the case was. And those are things that, you know, are nowhere. I think we had 324,000 foreclosures last year in this country, nowhere near what it was. But if you go back a couple to the pie graph, what I always think about this right here is 2/3 of and I would remember this quick soundbite, 2/3 of the homes in this country are either owned free and clear, or they have at least 50% equity, which would be considered equity rich. That is phenomenal. Now, there is another nuance to this, and the nuance is the overwhelming majority of this equity is held in older generations, which makes sense, right? They're baby boomers and above. I'm not saying people below that don't have significant equity, but they do. Now, the reality is these are in homes and in estates that will likely transition in the next 10 years. You can look it up. It's called Great Wealth Transfer. So I think paying attention to some of these dynamics relative to equity in your business is going to be very, very important.
Absolutely. Hey, so for time's sake, let's speak to this chart, and then I want to get to some Q&A, obviously with the time we have, if that's okay. But David, when you first showed me this really, it was almost like I said, this is the slide where people can go and take a deep breath and understand that don't get caught up in the headlines, the negative headlines. You want to speak to this a little bit?
Well, I think here's the understanding of it and how I oftentimes explain this. In this country, debt is a problem. And the national debt's a problem. Consumer debt is a problem. And the headline that will be used against us in some cases is mortgage debt is higher than it's ever been before. That is a fact. Mortgage debt is higher in this country than it's ever been before. What they leave out of that is the value of real estate, which is 47.9, call it $48 trillion. And on that $48 trillion, there's $34.5 trillion of equity. So while debt on the mortgage space is higher than ever been before, it's not a problem. You've kind of seen that line slowly, you know, increase. And why is that? Well, I'll tell you why. In 2008, you know, people were like, let's cash it out. Let's go buy a jet ski. Let's go on vacation. Let's go do whatever we want to do. And people are like, you know what? We're going to do it different this time. Everything that I've ever learned in life, I've learned by going, I don't want to do that again. Right? I'd love to tell you it was different for my life, but that's how we learn things. A lot of people were hurt, and people were like, you know what? We're going to protect the equity in our homes. we're gonna do things different this time. And it shows up in the sort of foundational underpinnings of housing. And that's why I try to bring this point if I'm ever speaking to a group of agents. Be confident in the strength of the market, be confident in what we do, and deliver the truth to people. Because I think, although many of us on the call are like, this all makes sense, I know this, the clients that we serve every day don't. It's called the technical term in this is called the curse of knowledge. Just because I understand something, I expect you to understand it.
Right. Right. Hey,
People we work with every day don't know all of this. And maybe you're even like, well, I've told my people this one time. It's like telling your kids to brush their teeth. You got to tell them a couple times a day, right? And maybe they'll get it. So,
David, I think I had the double jet ski trailer. You know what I'm talking about back in the day? I learned.
I'm pretty sure you did, Jimmy. So
I learned my lesson. Let me just say that I learned my lesson. So listen, Chris, you want to add anything to this? And then we're gonna kind of just go to the migration and what we're seeing a little bit here, and then we'll go straight into questions. So Sam, if you can get ready to queue us up with some of these questions that people have, that'd be great.
Yeah, I was just going to say on that prior chart, when everyone wants to talk about are things being released, I mean, is history repeating itself? And, at some point they will, but look in the middle, look at the yellow line, the gray line, see where they were inverted? That was the foreclosure, the short sale, right? That's where, the equity in my home was not as much as what I owed on it, right?
Great point.
Can see fast forward today, we're not there. There's a massive gap there. So even if somebody was impacted by a slowing economy where they lost their job, I can tell you this from my prior life as a real estate agent, banks don't want to foreclose on properties. It's the last thing they want to have on their balance sheet. So if you weren't able to afford your mortgage, the bank's going to say, go hire a real estate agent and sell your house and then pay off your mortgage debt and take your equity and go do what you're going to do. The short sale foreclosure delinquency problem was where those lines were inverted there in the middle. That's nothing what we're seeing today. So just a big difference. I think it's worth pointing out.
It's a great point. That's a great point. I'll tell you what, let's just go into some Q&A if that's okay. And Sam, if you can come in, I know that, hey, listen, first off, show some love. Give me some hearts or something for Gretchen, for David, and for Chris. I mean, this is the information we all need to set ourselves apart from our competition and be able to serve at the highest level possible. So, Sam, questions, where do we want to start? I'm sure there were a bunch as we were going through this.
Yeah, we'll start with new construction. There's a few questions in there regarding new construction, and maybe David or Chris, are you seeing an increase, or are there any numbers in terms of permits, any kind of occupancy rates that are coming about for new homes? Dennis Walsh put in the chat there that I guess LinkedIn recently released the Jobs on the Rise for 2026 report. And number 3 job on there that was listed, at least in LinkedIn, is new home sales specialists, which means that they're opening sales studios and looking for people to fill those roles. So that seems to be a little bit of an early indicator for some people's minds that there are some new home inventory coming down the road. So do we have any awareness on any of those, David or Chris?
I can speak to a little bit of it. Chris, is there anything you want to bring to that?
No, please go ahead.
Run with it. So what we know are a couple of things, and it's slightly counter to what you're saying. But one, builders are sitting on more inventory right now than they have in quite some time. I was in New York a couple of months ago at an event, and Lennar published they are spending 16% of the transaction on incentives and buying the rate down, and so builders are trying to get this inventory out in the market, and in the last couple of years they've won, right? They've been able to buy the rate down, they've been able to do what they needed to do to move the property. Now this is where it gets interesting. In 2026, starts are forecasted slightly lower than the last couple of years, and I think that's for a few reasons. One, they're looking for a little bit better operating environment. That is the truth. They're looking for cost of goods and some of those things to be tempered. But I don't see anybody calling for this to be a blowout year in new construction. Typically we're selling 700,000 to 800,000 homes a year right now is the clip that we're on. I think we all want to see more folks be able to get in homes, and that's going to be through builds. But I think going back to Chris's comment earlier, that's going to be through some zoning legislation. That's going to be through making it easier to build in some scenarios in certain markets. And we know I guarantee you, everybody on this call, you fit into one of two categories. Nobody's building in my market because there's not room, or we have a market where builders are active. But I don't see 2026 being the standout year outside of, listen, this is important, outside of something being done on the legislative front to make it more advantageous for builders. And I do think that's not out of the, sort of out of the question right now.
Yeah,
I think
that's a great point.
I'd add on new construction is that if you are representing or preparing to represent or talking to a seller where some of their competition could be new construction, just geographically it's close by, the type of house they have is the type of buyer that might be looking at new construction as well. That seller, and it's our job to help educate that seller. The builders are not emotionally attached to their properties. They don't assign, oh, I've got to ask $5,000 more than my neighbor because I put a water softener on my house, right? Like, they look at it cold, calculated asset, and they will react very quickly in the market. And so, again, for representing a seller where new construction may be a competition to their existing home that they're looking to sell, they have to pay attention to what the builders are doing out there, because builders will never build too much. And that's the other point I think Dave was making too, is they're never going to build too much to have too much inventory out there, even though we would love for them to do it because it would help with affordability. They're running a business. They're never going to outsupply the demand that they're foreseeing in a marketplace.
Yeah. Those water softeners though, man, they,
1,000 examples to write a seller. My house is worth more because, I put on special hoses behind the washing machine.
It's a great point.
It is.
And let me tell you this, builders in the market are going to do whatever it takes. They're going to win. And so sellers, we have to understand that and get that out there.
Yeah. Hey, let me do this, Sam, before we go to that next question, because I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. We're going to wrap this up here in about, we're going to go a few minutes over if that's okay with y'all. But I wanted to share something just to kind of give you an idea of some ways that you can actually utilize this maybe from that standpoint. So let me get this pulled up and then I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see here if I can do this real quick. All right. So what I wanted to do is I want to give you some ways, a prompt that you can utilize to maybe help you get some of these things together. Okay. So this is a way to utilize everything that we've done there. And as we mentioned, you could grab those things. I know that Sam's been sharing that in there. These are a couple of prompts. If you want to take a picture of this, but don't even just use this exactly. You can use this as an outline, but this is what we're talking about from a standpoint. Whatever you're using, I'm using ChatGPT in this case when I tested this. I've attached a copy of the HomeServices America 2026 National Housing Outlook. I'd like to turn this into a 30 to 45 second Instagram green screen reel using the cover page. You see the information that I've given there, and then I'm giving it the call to action. This is a way to utilize this. All right. So if you get a snapshot of that, that's one for Instagram. I will tell you that these do extremely well also when we're looking at utilizing some of the other situations with LinkedIn. So this is a great one for LinkedIn, and this is basically just asking it to help you draw up or put together a blog post on LinkedIn with a call to action for people who are considering selling or buying in 2026. So I want to give you something practical here you can utilize. Before I take this screen down, I'm going to give it just a couple more seconds, but again, use this as just an outline on how you can utilize this information in a way to really serve at a high level on these things. So I'm going to take this down just so we've got that. Sam, questions or anything in particular with maybe 2 or 3 more questions here as we wrap up?
Yeah, affordability question for existing homeowners, longtime existing homeowners, people that maybe purchased 2021 and earlier, as prices maintain or even go up if rates come down, if that demand continues to unlock and we see prices either hold steady or go up, as property taxes continue to increase in certain states and certain areas. What effect will that have on inventory in terms of like forced sales because of affordability from property tax standpoint? We don't have that necessarily issue here in California, but in so many states they do.
Guys, I
was just saying, I know in Texas it's a real issue. And it's not even really about the timing of when you own the home. Like, you could own your home free and clear and you could be retired. So you're on a fixed income at this point. And, no state is free. So, the states that don't have income tax, there are still they still got to collect money and revenue. And so Texas is, I know that's a big issue. And there's talk within the Texas legislature about how to handle that, right? On other caps, are they going to try to reduce it? I know here in Florida, the governor has actually proposed just outright eliminating property taxes on homes. And so it is a real issue. And again, it's going to be state by state on how they handle it. But as they try to generate revenue off that, the key is that, property taxes, and I've explained this to my mom before too, because she's like, it keeps going up. And I'm like, on the positive, it means your house is worth more, right? Because it is tied to that value. But it's a real issue that really can only get solved in those individual state levels. And hopefully it would do so before you start actually seeing an impact on folks having to sell their home, not because they can't afford the house, but they can't afford the taxes on the house anymore.
Right. I think so I mentioned I was in New York last week. This is a big issue in New York. Two things: taxes and insurance, two big issues. Now, I do believe they're both real issues. I don't think it's going to cause widespread, problems for people, but it will cause problems for some. You mentioned the fixed income piece and, condos in Miami and in Florida and some of the assessments and things like that have caused issues for people. Now, here's what I can say. I don't see a lot of good solutions for that, but let me go back to what I said before. Housing affordability is the biggest issue for Americans. And typically in this country, let me give you the good news. Presidential election cycles start 2 years early. So this year we'll start on the next presidential election cycle. You can get excited about that, right?
Right.
Now, I believe this will be that was a joke, but this will be the central issue: housing and affordability. And if you don't think taxes and insurance aren't going to be some form or fashion a part of that, I believe they will be. And I think it's going to take doing some things differently to alleviate some of those issues. Like you mentioned in Florida there, Chris, and some things that they say, hey, we've got to sort of change how we're doing this because the trajectory it's unsustainable.
Yeah. Hey, Gretchen, I'd love to get your perspective on some of the conversations agents can have about this. One thing I would say is I thought what Chris said about the conversation he had with his mom, I think if we all used that filter as we're having some of these conversations on how would we communicate this to our mom, it's a great filter to utilize because in that case, we're coming from a place of probably giving a little bit of grace on maybe what they're asking, and as well as giving something where we're giving them the information they need, even if it maybe hurts a little bit. Just to give them the right information. So, Gretchen, you want to add to that? And then, Sam, if we will, after Gretchen, we'll wrap up with one last question, if that's okay.
I would just say this really reinforces know your local data, know your local market.
Right.
This report is meant to be a national housing outlook. It's a starting point for your conversation. And as David said at the very top of our meeting today, this is meant so that you can look like you're an expert, and also you're helping them interpret the headlines that they're seeing and the TV newscasts that they're hearing. But you've got to know your local data because insurance is impacting markets in some areas way more than in others. Same with property taxes, same with local legislation on permitting issues. Like we have huge issues here in Colorado with getting permits timely and just way too much red tape to get houses built. So know your local market, use this as a launching point for that.
Yeah. And,
it's great.
And to that point, Gretchen, I saw in the chat, several people asked like, hey, how could I reproduce this or do similar stats at a local level? KCM launched KCM Local. You can go in there and type in zip codes and you can basically grab data, all inventory prices for specific zip codes and stuff. If you're a member of NAR, you've got free access to RPR. You can get local data out of RPR as well too. So there's a lot of different sources where you can get this at a local level as well too.
Yeah, RPR is great. RPR is a fantastic free tool, but I would tell you probably the best subscription you can pay for is Keeping Current Matters. And so go out and subscribe for that. Keeping Current Matters, that's David's company. And you can subscribe for national. That's where these charts are from, and local. So yeah, go sign up.
Yep.
Yeah. Sam, last question.
Yeah, last
That's
question
right.
Regarding the tax exemption, the federal IRS federal tax exemption for homeowners, the 250, 500. Do we see any movement on that in DC to move that upward?
The last I saw of it, there was bipartisan support to double it and then hopefully tie it to CPI so you don't have the same problem in 20 years, the same thing happening again. I have not seen any updates on that since probably early fall when it was becoming an issue, because it will increasingly become an issue as we saw that chart, the graph of 49.5% price appreciation nationwide over the last 5 years. You might think like, wow, that's that's 500,000 in profit as a married couple, 250. That's a lot, of profit, but it's really not anymore. There's a ton of people that have that. The complication is that you have some politicians that think, oh, this is a blue state issue would have higher property values, right? Or they'll look at it as a red state issue. And so if they get past the politics of it, it is a no-brainer decision that they should make, because again, like some of the other things, I don't think it creates an immediate flood of inventory onto the market. But there are people right now who are looking at that tax problem if they sold, and they're saying, I'd be better off holding on to this property, and when I pass, divest my property to my children or heirs via that way, as opposed to selling now and paying capital gains tax on the gain. Yeah. So, yeah. 97. If I think I'm right, it was 1997 when these caps were put in place, and we've seen almost 240% price appreciation since that time.
Yeah, it's incredible. Hey, listen, again, everybody, thanks for joining us. This has been super helpful. I know Sam's been sharing the links. Everything is available to you. But what I would just say is this. Don't just let this be an hour where you got educated or maybe even entertained a little bit. Make this a time when you apply this and utilize this in a way that helps you show yourself as the professional that you are, and really separates you from your competition. Again, thank you, David. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Gretchen. Sam, thanks. Savage on the background. Thank you guys for joining us on this, and I hope this empowers you to be everything you're supposed to be for your clients. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.